Yes. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our spiritual service. As most of you know, our spiritual services this year have been devoted to the chapters in Living with Reality. And today we're up to Platform 7, which is Becoming Accountable. I glanced through it this morning. I know that I should know what's in the book since I wrote it, but it's good to refresh myself to what is in a chapter. And whenever I look at it, I'm aware of how much more conscious the book is than I am. And
did I write that? Right?
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, that is so clear. Why am I so muddled? I've never. So I know somewhere inside here there is an understanding of these things. Scotty, I put you to sleep already. There is. Good. I am going to cheat by looking in the book a bit today because it is so condensed, this chapter. There's so much material in it, and I want to get through some substantial amount of content today. And I've also asked Todd to be prepared for when I do the second talk on the topic that we will also upload it to Ustream. Not that anybody out there is going to want to see it, but that we would like to make it available because this is going to be divided into the first part, which is about becoming accountable and making amends, and the second part is devoted to the 7 dirty secrets of the dark side. And the reason for that is that we have realized that to become truly accountable, we need to learn not only to be aware, not only to make amends, but to be able to have some kind of command over our behavior. And that means that we need to understand ourselves better and be able to deal with some of the negative energy that we are besieged by and learn how to deal with it in a different way. So today I hope to be able to cover the first 2 parts, which is the awareness of our accountability and the amends process, and then move on to the dark side. The dark side meaning the constellation of negative energy, negative thoughts, negative feelings. There's many ways of seeing it, and I'll talk about that in the second talk. So we will be making that one available as well, free. Which normally we don't because it's part of Consciousness Boot Camp. So I think the first thing is for us to start thinking about where we are. Those of us who have been following this series will realize that we have just finished becoming integrated. In the book is divided, the platforms of the book, which are like steps in a 12-step program, they're divided into 3 sections. The first section is about our relationship with others. The second section is about our relationship with ourselves. And the third is about our relationship with the process of living itself. And Platform 7 is the conclusion of the second part, where we're shifting our relationship with ourselves from fear to partnership. And what I mean by that is that in Platforms 5, 6, and 7, becoming self-aware, becoming integrated, becoming accountable, we are really looking at ourselves, and we're so afraid of the shame that we're going to feel looking at ourselves that we don't do it. and we're so afraid of our accountability that we ignore it or deny it or get overwhelmed. And so this concludes that second segment on turning that into a partnership where we actually begin to feel the benefit of looking at ourselves, shifting ourselves, and becoming accountable. So in Platform 6, which was also divided into 2 parts, we were dealing with our fragmentation, how we get pulled by different aspects of ourselves. We get dominated by some part of us that is out of balance with all the rest of us. And many of us have gone through that month together in Consciousness Boot Camp, and people who are following the book, about really becoming aware of how out of balance we are, that how parts of us run us. And the major way, of course, that we're out of balance, that we're all out of balance, is that ego tends to run us. And by that, I don't only mean snobbery, but I mean the survival instinct that's associated with ego, that's all about me. And that I've discussed a lot throughout this series. Also, if you're interested, there are videos on all the sections already on YouTube that are free of charge. We have livingwithreality.com. We have a program, a new program called Consciousness Bootcamp Lite that you can get free. And it starts out in the beginning about ego, instinct, and evolution, and showing us how our egos evolve, that there's nothing wrong with us, it's not our fault, it's just the way it is, and how our egos dominate us. So we've been dealing with that, and we've come to the end of Platform 6, which doesn't mean that we're end of the process of becoming integrated, but that this is as much time as we get, and we get to go on, and then we have a whole lifetime to become integrated. So we've done that, and we've dealt with Platform 5, which is becoming self-aware, which was hideous, right, where we had to really start questioning every single thing we did. The thing about self-awareness that I want to reiterate is that most of us wander around assuming that everything we do and think is perfectly normal, perfectly justified, and we continue to justify it day after day, and we don't go into inquiry. And in Platform 5, we just had to do it. We had to ask ourselves about everything. Why did I do that? Why did I eat that? Why did I say that? To really get to the bottom of what is motivating our behavior. So that was another hideous month, I have to say. And now we're up to accountability, which isn't so great either. So but if we could get through this, you know, we would feel so much better, because the most important thing about accountability is that we already know that we're hurting other people. And it's like the guy who's drunk and hits the child and then blames the kid and then goes and has to drink some more. And he's drinking more because he feels so much shame about having hurt the child because he was drunk to start with. So obviously he has to drink again. And this is just one simple example of how the fact that we don't face our accountability does not save us from pain. It only makes it worse. All that pain goes underground. I learned years ago that if I was really having problems with someone who was carrying a big resentment, the reason probably was that I owed them an amend and I didn't want to make it. And I was just piling on justification after justification after justification about what was wrong with them. Not that there wasn't anything wrong with them, but what was keeping me from being with them was the fact that I felt so darn guilty about myself that I didn't want to face them, and I had to blame them for it. So this is such a liberating step. I was in a 12-step program. I joined in 1978. That's when I had my spiritual awakening. And in the 12-step program, there is an amends step. And I felt so awful. I wrote letters to people that I hadn't seen in 20 years. I made telepathic amends to people from when I was 7 years old. And I went through this process, and I never have given myself a better gift, because I felt like a new person. I used to be so shame-based, because I'm very sensitive, and I'm very sensitive to other people's feelings and hurt. And having any kind of guilt or shame was like walking around with a mountain on my heart. And the process of making amends in that 12-step program really freed me from shame. And because of that, I became so much more self-aware, because I wasn't afraid of seeing something awful about myself, because I already knew how awful I was, and so what? And so are you. And so there's really no issue about it. And I know that that laid a foundation for this platform, which is a much more specific way that to really go into the issue of accountability on a much deeper level than I had in the 12-step program. And it came to me a way of making amends, a formula, a format for amends, a tool, which we have in this, and we also have it in the back of the book in the tools section. And this has saved more relationships than I can tell you, because when people get it, they know exactly how to make an amend, and they do it, they clean it up, and then there is an openness and the chi begins to flow again. The love starts to flow, and we can feel so much better about ourselves and each other because we're not embarrassed in front of each other. We don't have to make each other wrong anymore because we feel clean. So I really encourage you to study this chapter in detail. I remember when I was writing the book, I was trying to write this chapter, and I'd sit there and I was so blocked. I could feel it. Nobody wanted me to write this chapter. Nobody wanted to hear it. And I felt like a complete idiot because nothing was coming through me. I don't write from my head. I write from, divine guidance. And it was blocked, and I could hear the voices saying, enough already, enough already, enough already. Throughout the book, there's an example about hitting a car at 5 miles an hour. I go back to that example 100 times in this because it's so complicated. What are we really accountable for? So let's start with the awareness part. Have I made you feel like, oh my God, I can't wait to find out how to become accountable, or is it, oh, I've had enough already? Where are we so far? Who's into the I can't wait to hear about this? Okay, we have 1 vote. I really have done a good job. Okay, we have 2 votes. I've done a great job introducing it. People on video have already turned it off. Here I thought I was making way. And the rest of you, okay, so who doesn't want to hear anymore? Okay.
Well, mine would be a thank you, damn it.
Okay.
It's like bad tasting medicine.
Oh, I was trying to tell you how wonderful this is. Obviously, I'm not very compelling.
It's the information.
I'm not an inspirational speaker. Okay.
Motivational, right?
Right, I'm not a
Well, I don't think anybody could have felt inspired Jesus or somebody in the crucifixion. Represented it.
Okay, so now, after this wonderful, happy introduction, we're going to go straight into what is accountability. And I'm going to do it in a slightly different order than I have in the book, and then I want to get to facing the damage. Are you ready?
I think there's a third option. I'm in denial, and I'm like just going away and thinking maybe she'll stop talking. Like I've left the room.
You're gone.
I'm gone. Yeah.
Oh, I feel so much better now. Okay.
Feels better.
First of all, I want to explain one thing about accountability, because people use accountability and responsibility interchangeably. Some people do. And so for those of you who are not familiar with this book and who are not familiar with our teachings, this is the way I use the words. This is not about this is truth. This is about the way I use the words, so that we're all on the same page. Is that we are responsible for things, doing things. Oh, here's another latecomer. Wonderful. Glad to see you. Yeah, there's a chair up here.
That shows my inconspicuous.
Yeah. For those of you out there in video land, there's the lining up in the back, but nobody wants to sit up here. James is compelled. Oh, there it goes. Thank you, Bill. Okay, you got here just in time. So accountability, responsibility is for something. I'm responsible for the dishes. I am responsible for this job. I am responsible for things. Or sometimes we can be responsible for people. I am responsible to take care of the kids today. But accountability, which is what this is about, is always about relationships. I am accountable to you for something. So for example, if it's about picking up the kids, if I have a conversation with my wife and say, okay, I'll pick up the kids today, then I am accountable to her for picking up the kids, because that's my relationship is with her. I am also accountable to the kids for not leaving them in a parking lot for 3 hours. So it's accountability is about to each other. So it's always about relationships. I may be accountable to my boss for doing my job in a responsible way. So is everybody clear about how I'm using the word accountable? Okay. Becoming accountable, facing the damage. What is the damage the ego creates and who pays? Now, we have all acknowledged that we are driven by ego, that it's perfectly normal. It's the way we're designed as human beings. The ego is the part of us that's about me, protect me, save me. Its job is to take care of itself. In fact, the ego thinks it's accountable to us to take care of us. And I've said 100 times, the ego's job is to tell us when to brush our teeth and when to put on the sweater. But the ego has taken on something much bigger than that. It has taken on all of survival and making us feel good and getting an edge in the world so that our needs are met and so on. And that fragment of us called the ego has run the show. And it has caused a lot of damage. I'll give you an example. Have you ever been in a car where there's a guy next to you who just has to get in front of you? Mm-hmm. Has to. You know, it's not good enough for that person to be an eighth of a second behind. No, that person has to get ahead of you. That is ego. That is, I have to get ahead. My well-being comes first. I'm going to prove something. I am powerful, and all of that. And that's ego. And how many car wrecks have been caused by the ego? Just in a simple example like that of I've got to get ahead, or I'm not going to let you get ahead. Okay, you're trying to get ahead of me, I'm going to put my foot on the gas. Now, is there anybody here who has never been in a situation like that?
Or done it.
Or done it. Well, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant.
Yeah. Well, we are the one, too. We are the one. Isn't that exactly, that is, and how much damage has the ego caused? Or when the ego gets us to do needless damage to ourselves because we want to look better. Or the ego makes us work when we really should be resting because it tells us that we want to be the hero. Or because we're so afraid that we're going to be judged as something. How much damage the ego has done to us, and we discussed a lot of that in Platform 6. And here it is, it's just doing its job, but it's very immature. As I've explained in the beginning of the book, it's not the ego's fault, it just needs education. So there are real obvious examples. How many of us women have been in situations with men who insist that they know how to fix something and they don't? And then it breaks worse. And then you have to call somebody in, and now it costs 5 times more than it would have before. And the man has to explain this about why this happened, and it has nothing to do with him.
Or the one that knows where they're going, that drives around in a circle over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. So we've all done this, you know. Or the woman who thinks that she has to prove that she knows child rearing better than the man because this is her this is what, and she's obviously doing it wrong, but she will not allow the man to intervene at all in the child rearing, because after all, isn't she the loving, nurturing one? Isn't she the one who knows what she's doing? And how much damage is done there? Damage to the children, damage to themselves. So here we have so many examples, and I'm giving some simple ones, but we could go on and on and on, and then there are collective examples of the damage. And who pays for that? You know, if you're raising the child incorrectly, the child is going to pay, and the parents are going to pay, and everybody the child gets in touch with for the rest of their lives is going to pay. There's always damage, and everybody pays. When somebody hits your car because they're trying to get around you, because their ego says, I don't feel good about myself, but I'm going to prove something now on the road, who gets damaged? You, your car, the insurance company, everybody who pays the insurance rates, everybody who's going to be left hanging there on the freeway for an hour because all the road is blocked, and it goes on and on and on. Think about the damage that has been created by that one little thing. Now, what about our collective egos and our collective damage? Think about the damage that has been done because we believe that our religion is best, or that my country deserves your country's resources just because we have manifest destiny, or whatever the excuse is. The human species is entitled to consume whatever we want, and the heck with the environment and every other species. The human species is entitled to produce comfort for ourselves and ignore all consequences. My race is better. My sexual preference is better. My class is better. My gender is better. Think about the damage. And who is accountable? And here it is. When we talk about these kind of collective damage, pretty much we're all accountable, because we've all colluded, we've let ourselves gain the benefit from these kinds of things. If we haven't stood up and done anything about it, we're all accountable. We're all accountable because we have not, as a collective, really addressed the ego. There are bits and pieces of that happening now. Eckhart Tolle did some important work in bringing consciousness to people about the ego. And that was wonderful, but I think that becomes a fad and then everybody forgets about it. Or they don't really get it, or they don't know what to do about it, which is why, you know, living with reality is a valuable resource, because it really shows us step by step how we can retrain our egos to be different.
Well, I've never put this together, but as I've been hearing you talking, what I've noticed is when if I'm in one of those roles that you have been mentioned, what I saw this morning is that is a cover-up, because in some way I haven't taken accountability for something previous that has instilled that state, that weakness within me, which wants me to be in denial. So I go out and I like the childbearing thing, because of the lack of accountability of my relationship to that child in foremost, and recognizing that, you know, my main job is to take care of that child. And if I'm not clear about that, then I won't take in that support from my wife, which maybe I can't be able to bring to that child now. And because I'm not looking at that accountability level, I can see that my ego wants to cover that up. It's trying to cover up that I'm not accountable for things. Right, absolutely. And I'll be getting much more into detail about what we're accountable for later, and all the levels of accountability, which it's very complicated. But I also want to say that we have a tendency to take on accountability for things where we are not accountable. And one of the biggest difficulties that we have in determining what our accountability is that we haven't been trained to know what we are accountable for. We are either exonerated by people who say, oh, that's okay, when it isn't okay, or we're blamed for things that we really didn't do. And when I say that,
I don't mean that necessarily verbally, but I'll give you an example. When a parent says to a child, "You're killing your mother," am I really killing my mother? But that child begins to internalize that. Oh, you're killing your mother. Or when the child is conceived and the mother says, "Oh my God, another child, I'm going to kill myself. What am I going to do?" Suddenly that nascent life is already getting the message that its existence is damaging. And so at the heart of our difficulty of taking accountability is the fact that we feel accountable for those things for which we are not accountable, and are so shame-based that we therefore cannot face the accountability for the things that we are accountable for. I feel like I need to pause and everyone needs to take that in. Should I say that again?
Yes.
I would say that all of us have had, to some degree, experiences from sometimes our very conception, which we feel great shame about, that really is not our fault. Such as if you are born at an inconvenient time for your parents, or the parent wants to be pregnant because she or he wants to save the marriage and it doesn't work out. Or the parent has some fantasy about what it's going to be like to have a baby that is going to give that parent value. Or because it's going to give them status. Or because I'm no longer going to be lonely. Or now I have to get married, or all of these agendas that we have around our children. Oh, this child is going to be able to do something that I could never do. Go to college, become a great spiritual teacher, take over the family business, be a chip off the old block, do what I couldn't do, or do what I did and do it better, or make me look good by looking stupid so I could walk around all the time feeling better than someone. The parents have agendas for their children, and they have reactions to the very conception of the child. And that child, from the moment of conception, is a consciousness. And as a consciousness, you know, even what is not said. How many people, I've been a counselor for over 30 years, have come into my office, and when we go deep into their psyches, they're in the womb and they already know what the score is, and they know what their job is supposed to be. Oh, I'm here to keep mommy company because dad is alienated and goes to the bar every night. Or I'm here to make mommy feel like she's competent even though she isn't. Or I'm here to make dad feel so and so. And you already know. You're a consciousness. You get it. And you've taken on whatever it is. So if the parent feels trapped, for example, when you're conceived because, oh no, I was really questioning this marriage and now I'm stuck, as an example, it's like you come up with a shame, the shame of existence. And I talk about the shame of existence in Ego, Instinct, and Evolution in the introduction. I always send people back to the introduction because it's really important. But before you're even come into the world as your own independent person, you could be walking around with toxic shame. And that infant that's in that consciousness that's in there may also be aware that, oh, I was conceived out of a drunken experience between two teenagers who don't know each other. And here I am. And now what? And immediately, how many people who've had children can honestly say they never had a negative thought during their pregnancy? Oh God, you know. Or the guy is singing, oh no, another mouth to feed, or something. And even though you may be ultimately actually overjoyed to have the child, and often they aren't ultimately overjoyed, even though people often will not admit that, nevertheless, the child is sensitive because we little ego beings, you know, everything is about us anyway, isn't it? It's always about me. And so we're already coming into the world with some sense of accountability, of having hurt somebody. And many times our mothers are sick when they're pregnant. And, oh, I did that. And we can't help it. And so we come in with such a sense of having been accountable for something we're not accountable for, that we have so much shame that we don't want to deal with the things we are accountable for, because it's like the cup is already filled and you put one drop in, it's going to spill out. And so you look at someone and say, what is the matter with you? Why can't you take accountability for this? Well, because you're already so filled up with shame. Not that you're going to admit it, right? Because you're the blameless one who's not accountable for anything. So what we do is we fluctuate between complete denial, because we can't stand facing our accountability, and toxic shame. And, you know, I'll tell you, having been an alcoholic, and I haven't had a drink in 32 years, and I don't miss it, by the way. But I do remember sitting in the bar, and there's this guy who normally acts like, yeah, nothing ever bothers him. But then he starts drinking, and he starts crying, oh, I was so bad, you know, and I'm so terrible. And you're looking at it and you really are. But anyway, the fact is that people are fluctuating between denial and this over sense of accountability, and that is so often carries with it self-pity. We're so terrible. Oh, I'm so terrible. Now, you know, when we think we're that terrible, does that make us accountable? No. It makes us full of self-pity. Then we want everybody to tell us, no, you have no accountability there, you know. We had a little conversation like that the other day when you were saying, you haven't validated me. And I said, validated you for what? What is it? We're trying to look at your accountability. You haven't validated me. Sorry to pick on you, James, but it just came to my mind that we just went through that, right? It's just, we are so afraid of accountability. We are so afraid of accountability. We're looking for validation in the moment that we're doing it because we are so shame-based. We hope that by the time you get to platform 7, you've gotten some compassion for yourself. What I love about living with reality, and I have to admit that I love it, is that, and this child caused me great pain, I want to tell you. I have probably sent more negative energy to this book than anybody else, and there's been probably a lot of people sending negative energy to the book. But it's like, oh my God, this book took me 9 years. You know, when I'm thinking about it now, thank God it wasn't a baby. Although maybe it is. Maybe I need to make amends to the book for all the kvetching and moaning that I did about how hard it was to write. I know I was making a point. Anyway, oh yes, by the time we get to platform 7, we hope that we've developed a little bit of self-compassion. We are all the same. We are all the same. We all have egos. We're all scared to death. We're all in the me, me, me universe trying to save our asses instead of saving our souls. We are human. We are designed this way. That's why we are trying to change on the collective level. Because as individuals, it is nearly impossible. And I say nearly impossible because I'm sure there's somebody who's going to say, well, I know somebody who, fine, you do. I don't know anybody personally that I honestly can say has transcended the human condition. But as a collective, we can change that human condition because so much of what we are is the collective consciousness. We are aspects of that collective consciousness. So when the collective in my day said that drinking was cool and so was smoking cigarettes, first thing I did when I was 16 years old, you know, is I tried to smoke and try to drink, both of which made me terribly ill, but that didn't stop me. Now, you can see that there's some progress in society because you don't have the Marlboro ads up, and you're not supposed to be trying to push alcohol and cigarettes on teenagers. That's a change in the collective consciousness. In the 60s, everybody thought it was hip, slick, and cool to use drugs, psychedelics and marijuana. Now kids are still doing it, but at least the culture has changed so that there's some acknowledgement that maybe drugs are bad. When we were growing up, sugar was the thing that you gave every child as a way of telling you, I love you. Now, after 100 years too late, we're beginning to realize the toxicity of sugar. All of that is collective support. It shows you that the collective consciousness can change. And that instead of being pressured to do something, you can start to be pressured not to do something. And that's a good use of the collective consciousness, is to use the peer support to support you to do what's best, to really do what's for your highest good. And that is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to help the ego to start making choices that are healthy and positive for ourselves and for others. When we got to Platform 4, we talked about mutual support, doing that which is for the highest good of all, including myself. We came from a culture, I came from a culture where women were expected to sacrifice ourselves for everybody. That was the model. And then the model started changing to women are supposed to go out there and express themselves. That took a shift in the collective consciousness. So if we began to have a shift in the collective consciousness where we begin to become accountable without shame, oh my God, we could start looking at ourselves. We try to do that at the stream. We try to do that in Consciousness Boot Camp. After a while, everybody starts talking about how screwed up they are, and we're all laughing. And what happens to the shame? Of course, what happens to the shame when you walk out of the room and you're all by yourself? Then the ego comes back in and says, oh, you should be better than that. You should be better than that. Because, as we go back to the ego is always looking for a way to keep us alive, and it thinks that we're going to be supported by the world if we're better in some way, or worse, or more this or more that. It's always comparing. And so we're afraid to admit that we've done wrong, because who's going to love us now? Who's going to want us? Go to your boss and say, oh, by the way, I just lost us $1 million. Gee, I'm sorry. Only CEOs can get away with that and get a bonus. Poor workers cannot do that. So this thing about accountability, we can change the culture, and then we will all be more relaxed about it. Chris, you were talking about leaving the room. When you're in a workshop and everybody's joking around and laughing at themselves, you're right up there, waving your hand and saying, well, you think that was stupid, wait till you hear what I did. Because suddenly there is collective support for that degree of self-honesty and accountability. That's what we're aiming for. That's what this chapter is for. For us to start getting honest collectively and recognize the fact that when we leave the group and the safety of the group, probably our egos are going to start beating us up. We're laughing about it in here, we're crying about it out there, and then we immediately go into denial, because once we start beating ourselves up, we have no place to go but denial. Because if we're not in denial, we'll kill ourselves, right? So we have to come back again together. People say, you're just trying to set me up for coming to another workshop. Yeah, dude, because we need to be together in order to take this on together, in order to overcome our shame together, because we continually begin to see ourselves as human. We are products of the human condition. This is the state of human consciousness, not the state of my consciousness. So yes, please do come back. That is the idea. And in addition to that, we are creating, co-creating the collective vortex of change, which is, as we come together, we are creating more and more energy to bring other people in. It is really remarkable that I've been teaching essentially the same things with some evolution, I hope, but on some fundamental level, year after year after year, and suddenly people are saying, well, gee, that sounds really interesting, whereas before they went, you know what I mean? Why is that? because in our world, it is not just us. There's more and more awareness of this kind of consciousness, more awareness of the need for this kind of consciousness. And there is a collective vortex of change that we are collectively co-creating. We can do that around accountability. We have to. We have to start facing the damage that we do, and we need to try to figure out how to make amends. Now, I've mentioned already that we have been shamed for things that we are not really responsible for. That, okay, I was conceived. I didn't do that. Excuse me, you know what I mean? You did that. And the only reason that the parents are blaming us is because they already feel so shamed about their irresponsible behavior about having children that they shouldn't have, they're not ready to have, right? So everybody's passing the buck of accountability. But there are other kinds of ways that we are shamed and are therefore afraid to look at our accountability, and that we're very confused by it. You take the child, like I said, you're killing your mother. Okay, I give an example, I think, in the book about dad gets migraines, and a child comes running in the house making noise, just being a child, and everybody in the house goes, you're making your father worse. You gave your father a headache. You did this to your father. You did. Oh, how many children have grown up in families where one or both of the parents have hair trigger anger, irritability? And what do you learn? That you're responsible for having created that. Because you say, oh, you're getting on your father's nerves. You made your father angry. You upset your mother. You this, you that, you the other thing. Well, all you did was be a child. Are you really accountable for that damage? No, you are not. See, our inability to distinguish what we're truly accountable for is creating the shame. It isn't looking at ourselves honestly that's creating the shame. It's the dishonesty that has created all the shame. That child has just been a child. Now, it is true that if you know that your father has a hair trigger and you want him to look bad because you're insinuating yourself with mom, this happens frequently. Frequently. It's like, oh, mom is my pal. So I'm going to make dad look really bad. So mom is going to love me more. So I'm going to do something and then act innocent. Oh, I didn't do anything. All I did was ask Daddy if I could borrow the car. And I'm 6 years old. And then Daddy gets angry, and then she says, oh, George, stop yelling at the child. Now there we're accountable, because we deliberately did it in order to make Daddy look bad. Now how many of us can honestly admit that we have done stuff like that? Try to make somebody look bad. Oh, I've done it with bosses. I hate this boss. I do something, I really want that person to look bad. So I do something, and I always choose something where I'm going to look blameless. That's the important thing. That's different from truly having no accountability. Now, once you know that the person has this, for instance, let's say let's say you know somebody who has severe osteoporosis, and you grab them and you break a bone, which has happened to me. I'm not the one who did it, I'm the one who was done to. That's completely, you have no accountability for having actually broken my bone. I mean, who would think that you go like this, you're going to break a rib, right? But if you know that the person has a weak rib, and you say, oh, I forgot. Yeah, that's different. Accountability. It's not so simple, is it? Now yes, Richard?
Well, it just made me think, doesn't it have something to do with motivation?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. What is my motive? What is my motive? Did I know? Was I trying to hurt someone? Was I really intending to damage them? That's important. If I'm driving along and I have an accident because all of a sudden traffic stops and no human being could have stopped the car in time, then that's very different from, oh, I think I'm going to smash into that guy right in front of me because I'm having a bad day and really want to kill somebody. Yeah, absolutely, Richard.
But you are accountable for negligence.
Yes.
You know, so you're driving along, you get distracted, you're looking at your cell phone or whatever, and you crash into somebody. You didn't intend to crash into somebody, but you were negligent.
That is absolutely true, and this is part of, as we go through it, I mean, I go back to this 5-mile-per-hour accident over and over and over, all the levels. Well, and is it just negligence? Did I stay up late last night watching television, and therefore I'm too tired to be driving? And therefore I wasn't able to put my foot on the brakes. So or am I distracted by the cell phone? Or am I hungover from the night before? Or am I arguing with my wife in my head? Or am I arguing, or am I looking over at the children while I'm driving? Have you ever seen anybody doing that? Or am I applying lipstick on my way to work? All of these things, am I accountable? And this goes back to Christopher's point, that the accountability starts earlier, because our real accountability, if we're looking at this, is to be in as optimum condition as we can be before we get into that car. And how many of us are? And how many of us can be? Let's get realistic about this. Here you are, you've got 4 kids, a job, and a sick wife. And you're just stretched to the max, and you're not getting enough sleep, and you're worried about losing your job, and you get in the car, and you're bleary-eyed, and you've had 4 cups of coffee. Are you really in optimum condition to be driving? And you could be having that 5-mile-per-hour accident. Now what is your accountability? Or, I give another example which is hideous. What about the person who hits your car at 5 miles an hour, does damage to your car, an unavoidable accident, let's say, but this person has no insurance? Well, obviously, they are accountable for the damage that they've caused me and my insurance company, that they are uninsured. But supposing I am living in a society that pays such low wages to a certain layer of workers that there's no way on earth that they could afford insurance. Then am I not accountable for the fact that they can't afford insurance, so that when they hit my car, they can't take accountability for having hit my car? Am I not accountable for when that person has the 4 or 5 children and the sick?
Because you stand by and let society have people that can't afford.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to fill in the...
Absolutely. And aren't we all accountable for that?
In a collective way.
Yeah, in a
I personally respond, but in a collective way, I'm responsible.
Well, and as if we're responsible in a collective way, we're responsible in a... That's right.
Yeah, I try to separate.
Right, you just got caught there.
Wants to get me on these 100% responsibilities by looking at it from the, it's just my little part that I'm collecting.
Well, it is true, of course, that it is just our part. However, we are collectively responsible and accountable, and so am I. If some mentally ill person gets a shotgun or a machine gun and goes into the post office and kills 20 people, you can say, oh my God, look what they did. But what about the fact that we don't have proper treatment for the mentally ill, and we let them wander around the streets, or we don't have proper gun control, or whatever it is? We are collectively accountable for that, because we have to each other. So, oh my God, didn't I tell you were going to get to a point that you would wish that I would shut up?
Are we individually responsible for the collective laws, or absence of laws?
Of course we are. Who else
I
is?
just wanted to clarify the individual responsibility and collective responsibility.
We are individually responsible to do what we can. Now, does that mean that I personally am going to go out and fight everything that's wrong in society? Can I do that? Well, of course I can't. But that doesn't mean that we're not accountable. It just means that, oh my God, there are things that I can't fix, that I alone cannot. But what I can do is I can ask the source, what can I do? That's why I'm doing this. You know, my job is to help bring people's awareness to our accountability, both collective and individual.
And also what it would empower us to be able to do is that when we see somebody else that is fighting for something that we recognize, that we join them in regards to their strength, as to empower the collective, because that's expressing through them and they're grounding that. I mean, I can't do that, but I can support them to do that.
That's right. It's an attitude. It isn't, you know, it'd be very easy to say, well, I can't be accountable for everything, so I'm not going to be accountable for anything. It's a shift in attitude where we get it, that we are part of a world, that we all have accountability, and that we should stop pointing the fingers at people and realize what has actually created the conditions under which these things will transpire. It's very much like when we had 9/11 and people wanted to blame the terrorists and didn't want to take any accountability for the relationship that we had had with the Middle East, that the West has had in the Middle East over hundreds of years. We're entirely blameless. Entirely blameless. We have never done a single thing to have caused people to be angry at us. Entirely blameless. There is a liberation in this acknowledgement. As long as we don't go into, oh my God, now I have to fix everything. But because, see, this is very similar in pattern to, I was shamed for being born and therefore I can't handle my shame, and so I don't want to be accountable for anything anymore. See, that's the same pattern. It's like, this is overwhelming, all our accountability is overwhelming, and therefore I just want to go eat bonbons and go to Tiffany's and buy myself another diamond bracelet. If you live in a society, and I've talked about this in Platform 4 and 1, you know, if you live in a society where you are the only wealthy person and everybody else is poor, if you are overwhelmed by the shame of that, you will just ignore what's going on in your society and become a very sick, selfish person. Because you have to become encapsulated in yourself in order to ignore what's really going on. And that makes you sick. It's like, well, it's all about me. I'm just going to indulge myself some more. That isn't healthy. We're not healthy people. But when we are the only wealthy person in the poor society, doesn't mean that we have to say, oh my God, I should give away everything and live on the street, because then you're not even going to have power. But you might say, if I have been given this power, maybe I can use it. I wonder what would be the highest, for the highest good of all. How can I use what I have? So we always can be asking the question, when we see what we are collectively as well as individually co-creating, we can say, what can I do? What should I do? What is the proper use of my energy? I am not being responsible if this is something I used to do. I expended all my energy trying to help other people because I was so aware of other people's pain. And then I wasn't being accountable either, because I expended all my energy and I had nothing left the next day, and then other people had to take care of me. How many people say, oh, she's such a wonderful person, she sacrifices, and then everybody around her feels guilty and has to take care of her. Did you have something you needed?
Well, I just want to run something by you to see if it's a cop-out or not. Like, because that feeling of overwhelm, you know, when I connect to take on accountability, it's so strong. And there's a part of me that just wants to just go, fuck it. I'm not playing. I'm going to opt out of that whole paradigm, that whole way of thinking. I'm going to opt out. And I don't like that feeling either. Then I feel more shame about myself. But one thought that came to me is, like, let's say, for example, I'm talking to a coworker. They got in a car accident. Someone didn't have insurance, and they start making derogatory remarks about that. Such and such, so and so. And like, I feel like, well, one way that I could take accountability is to go, I understand that. I get the frustration, and the part that's so painful for me is that We have people who make $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour, and they're trying to live. And I get why they don't buy insurance, you know, and I'm sorry that you had to go through this, but
Yeah.
but like to like at least try to add something to the conversation.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm not going to write letters to my senators all day about every law. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, Chris. This is what I'm talking about. It's, you know, when we take on this understanding of our accountability and our collective accountability, it changes our consciousness. When my reference is, of course, always the war in Vietnam, because that was the one that formed my, you know, was the formative experience of my life, is that we started to see what was happening in Vietnam. And if I had said, well, hey, I'm not in Washington, you know, I don't have anything to do with that. But I did. I was part of the collective. I was paying the taxes that were being sent, you know, into the war, and I opposed it. So I did what I could. We always have to be aware. There are so many layers of accountability. I don't want us to get overwhelmed. The guy who drives without insurance is accountable. And we are all accountable for the situation where people can't get it if they don't have money. And everybody's accountable. It doesn't mean that he's not accountable. It means we're all accountable. And what that does is it brings us together. See, we're so afraid, but if we got it, it would bring us together. Because we would say, wow, what can we collectively do?
I know the thing that comes up the most, where I feel the most shame, is where I'm silent.
Yes.
In conversations with people. You know, and in the past I didn't really have a way to speak up without feeling like a vigilante or having an agenda to make them agree, see things my way. But I feel like with the work we've been doing in CBC, you know, and the tools we've been learning, that I have developed some capacity to start having conversations that I haven't had in the past.
Good.
Thank you, Beth.
And we also need to have accountability, take accountability for the state of our consciousness, that so many of us do use alcohol, drugs, caffeine, etc., which impair us when we get on the road. There's the accountability again. The guy who hits me because he's high on cocaine is accountable for that. But we are also collectively accountable for the world that created that addiction in that guy, or for the emotional pain in our society that hasn't been healed yet, so that people turn to so that people turn to drugs. And then but how quickly we judge. We say, oh, that asshole, you know, he was high and he hit me, and all like I never drove when I shouldn't have. No, I never did that. So, hey, this is a call to awareness for us to really work on our consciousness, on the consciousness of the world, to try to heal the pain that causes so much of the dysfunctional behavior, that causes so much of the damage. But in the meantime, we've got to deal with concretely, what did I do? And what damage did it cause? Now, going back to, I didn't realize we were going to get so involved in that particular collective conversation, but I'm glad that you did, because so much is in the book you can read. But this conversation has been much more of an amplification, so I'm glad we're doing this. I want to go back to, okay, what did I do? If I'm in the car and I hit the car in front of me, and that driver has severe osteoporosis, she might be majorly damaged. If I have the same accident and I hit a truck with a 19-year-old strapping guy in it, the damage is going to be different. Yet I did exactly the same thing. And what am I accountable for? It is not easy, is it, to determine these things, because I'm not speaking from a legal perspective, but I mean from a consciousness perspective. I am accountable to them for having hit them. I am not accountable for the fact that that woman has osteoporosis any more than I was accountable for the fact that my father had a migraine or a hair trigger, anger. So I can say, okay, I did this. I'm accountable. I hit that person at 5 miles an hour. That's what I'm accountable for. Now, in the world as it is, the insurance companies and the law, they've got it all figured out. You know, they've got, because people have no consciousness, so we have laws, right? But if we could actually be accountable to one another, we could sit there together and say, well, let me see. What am I accountable for? We could all ask the source. And the little old lady with the osteoporosis who's saying, oh, you hit me, you damaged me, you know, oh my God, you know. Well, why were you driving a smart car, which is about yay big, when you know you shouldn't be in that because you're going to be devastated by a little accident? Don't do that. Oh yes, but I'm half blind in one eye and I really can't drive anything big. So why are you driving? Do you even, is it even right for this person to be on? Now, I'm the little old lady with the osteoporosis, by the way, so I'm not telling on anybody else. You know, I get this. I really get this. You know, should I be, when should I be driving, when should I not be driving? Because that's assuming that there's anybody who's competent to drive on the road, which is definitely questionable.
Right, just the other day, I watched this guy who was crawling to his car, could barely walk. And he's driving the car, and my thought was, what's his reflexes going to be? Yeah, right, exactly. Brake on.
Exactly. So, I don't know, James, why you felt that you had to tell me that we needed to get to amends. Are you just trying to show me the page?
Just reminding you.
Now, why did you feel the need to remind me?
Because we only had about 25 minutes left, 1.5 hour lecture.
It's a little bit more than 25 minutes. I wonder why you really felt that. You've never done that before. It felt like you had to push me along.
I thought logically it was because we
well, but forget the
accountable issue than we were on the making amends part.
Well, maybe the accountable issue is the one that people are having the most trouble with. And the making amends they can read in the book. Not that I'm not planning, as a matter of fact, to go to the amends, but I'm just wondering what really, since this is the only time you've ever done this, I wonder what if you were practicing self-awareness, becoming self-aware, stimulus, reaction, response, what could possibly be the reaction that caused that response?
Could it possibly be that I've heard enough about my being accountable?
Yes, I think so. Has anybody else had enough of this?
Next, I think that's a collective response.
Yeah, I think so too.
Let's take a vote. Who are you in favor of moving on?
This is exactly.
Hypnotherapy relaxation right now. Let's just change topics.
Right, let's just change topics altogether. So,
Already fast forwarding to next weekend when the work really sets in.
yeah, well, it's wonderful. I'm really looking forward to the workshops when we do this. Because I don't think I realized just how reactive everybody was. Because I'm seeing it. It's like nobody can let me speak. I'm being interrupted every 2 minutes. And I think that's really interesting. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. The discomfort level must be like astronomical. And as I said, when I was writing this platform, I kept hearing, isn't that enough already?
Now we're just here to do it for you in person. And by the way, we have Tracy and Manuela.
Oh, hi. Glad to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. By the way, speaking of Tracy, new mom, the new mom is as accountable for being exhausted as the baby is, if she's allowed herself to be exhausted because of some emotional or psychological issue of her own. So, hi Tracy.
Take that. Supports the counseling industry.
Okay, so do people have a little bit of more idea, I mean, after all of this, about what accountability is really about?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Complicated.
It's very complicated. It's very and I really want you to get that it's complicated. And please read the book. Please read the book. It's online free. You don't even have to pay for it. Platform 7, page 429. Please read the book because as you go through it step by step, it will get, maybe it will help it get clearer. Yes, Jim, did you have?
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm seeing how little I really know about accountability. And it's uncomfortable how little I actually acquire into it.
Yes.
And I appreciate the opportunity to look, because I just don't think I would do it on my own. I know I wouldn't do it on my own.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that, because accountability is a buzzword, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And nobody really ever talks about what we're really, the truth about accountability.
Yeah, I hear it every day.
We want everyone else to be accountable.
Right. And we really don't know what it means.
Yeah.
So thank you for saying that. So anyway, now there is a question here before we get to making the amends, which is, why would we want to become aware of our accountability? Oh, before I get to that, I want to say one more thing. Clever. Hurting the person versus hurting the ego. When we are being called to accountability, we have to see the difference between the damage we've done to someone's ego and the damage we've done to them. Because when the ego is affronted and confronted, it will try to make you feel accountable for having damaged that person, when that is not true. If, for instance, in this conversation, you're beginning to glimpse, and I may not have been all that articulate today because I could feel the jangling and the interruptions that I couldn't even follow myself. It was like getting pulled here and there. It's like, please, let me just explain this. But what I really want to get this point across. Very often a person will say, you hurt me, and you did not hurt them. You just hurt their ego. Their ego says, you're making me feel bad.
You hurt my feelings.
You hurt my feelings. Well, is it really your feelings or is your ego? And that is a crucial piece too, because again, we will be blocked from taking accountability if we always feel shamed, and especially if we're feeling shamed for doing the right thing. I'm confronting you on a behavior that is damaging yourself and other people, but I'm hurting your feelings. I'm being disrespectful, demeaning, cold, cruel, mean, insensitive, harsh, right. Judgmental. It's like, excuse me, you're on my foot. Can we get the foot off first, then we can talk about how judgmental I'm being? Yes, very important distinction, and we do the same thing to others. We get all, and what we're really afraid of is not the other person, but how the ego will then beat us up. Because here's the irony, of course. Our ego is affronted because some bad behavior of ours is being called into question. So the ego, that's always busy protecting us, says, oh no, don't bring this up, this is going to cause me too much pain. And then when it is brought up, the ego is beating me up for whatever it is that I did. Oh, you stupid jerk, that you did such and such, you hurt so and so, you made a mistake, you did this. So first the ego wants us to go into denial, and then it's busily beating us up for whatever it is that we did. I didn't hurt you, I didn't even hurt your ego. It's your ego that's hurting you. The ego is busy badgering you, beating you up. That's why Platform 6 comes before Platform 7, because we talk more in depth about how the ego does these things, so that by the time we get to 7, we're kind of more relaxed about it and we get it. Oh no, you're not really hurting me, you're just hurting my ego. And really the truth is, it's my ego that's hurting me, because my ego is telling me that I was wrong or I was bad. I'm just saying, honey, if you don't stop eating, you're going to make yourself sick. How could you say that to me? How? You've just had 4 dinners and 3 desserts, and I can see your body is going nuts. This is how I can say that to you. How could you hurt me that way? You know I'm so sensitive on that topic. Meanwhile, the person who's being confronted is saying, oh, I'm disgusting, I'm a pig, I'm fat, I'm this, I'm that. So the ego's getting us both ways. And I'm saying, please be accountable to yourself for your health and your well-being. I care about you. Free will, but I have free will. I remember in a workshop years ago, a woman said to me, I have a right to hurt myself. I have free will. I said, yeah, but think of all the people you're taking down with you. Don't want to think about that. I have a right to shoot heroin. I'm not impacting anybody. Oh, yeah? Is that true? Is it ever true that when we damage ourselves that we don't impact other people? And yet we think we have a right. And this is also in the accountability chapter. It's like we don't want to give up the right to do anything we want. And isn't that the ego? I never want to see myself in relationship to other people. I don't want to see my accountability to the whole. Yet we look at somebody else and say, oh my God, how could she be doing that when she has a baby? See, but we, on the other hand, do not ever impact anyone by our behavior.
As long as you don't have a baby.
As long as you don't have a baby, right. Right. Or, well, I only drank on my free time. That didn't impact me the next day when I went to work or when I was snapping at everybody or... Oh my God. And this is the step towards liberation. And why is it the step towards liberation? Because there's two more parts of this platform. One is how to make amends, and the other is how to start changing so that we don't keep repeating these hurtful behaviors. Personally, I can't stand having to make amends 4,000 times for the same thing and not be able to change my behavior. Do you like that?
No.
But not making amends is not the answer. Somebody said, well, I don't want to make any more amends because I'm just going to do it again. Well, that's really too bad. Okay, so now, what is an amend? I want to get to that first in a second. Making amends is taking accountability to support the other to return to the state of wholeness that our behavior has damaged. We support the other to return to a state of wholeness that our behavior damaged. That's it, you know? And in the process of doing that, we're supporting ourselves to return to a state of wholeness that our behavior has damaged. I feel so much shame about what I did to you. The only way to help myself, to support myself, to return to a state of wholeness is to make amends. Otherwise, I can't live with myself. There is no wholeness in that. There's a lot of blocks to making amends. We feel so vulnerable. Someone is going to notice that we did something wrong. Of course, nobody has noticed it up to this point. It's only when we make the amends that somebody notices that we've been awful. That's so silly, isn't it? And then, will you be angry at me for having stepped on your foot? Oh my God, that's the worst thing that could happen, is that you would have that you would be angry at me for something that I did. She said, well, I can't do that. I can't make amends for that. She'll get mad at me. Will you seek revenge? Those are all fears. In the book, we go through so many exercises. You know, we have questions in the book for self-reflection. And you know, I talk about, can I think of behaviors for which I have not wanted to make an amends? Can I look at what's been blocking me? How can we become partners with ourselves and become our own best friends if we deny what we know about ourselves? This, remember, is our purpose here, is to start having an intimate relationship with ourselves, to change the relationship ourselves from fear. We are afraid of ourselves when we are afraid to make amends. We're afraid to look inside. That's not partnering. We can't become our own best friends until we start looking at the damage and until we start doing it with compassion. We have to have compassion for ourselves to understand there's always a reason that we've done hurtful things. Always a reason. whether it has to do with what the other person did or didn't do. It might have something to do with the way we were raised, with the way our egos developed, with painful things from our past. We need to have compassion. We have a compassion tool in here. I don't know if it's listed in the tools or not, but it's the no wonder tool. I think it got left out of the book for some reason, but it's in the text. Where I really start to, I did this out of immaturity. And then I start to look at myself, well, no wonder I'm immature. My mother wanted me to stay an infant because that's what she liked, is babies. And so when I go to make the amends for having done something out of my immaturity, I have compassion for myself. It's the no wonder. That doesn't take away my accountability. It just means that I bring in the compassion. Clues that we owe an amends. This is cute. This is on page 448. We walk around grumbling constantly about what he or she or they did. Have you ever done that?
On occasion. I've heard other people do it.
Yes, I've read other people have done that. When we're doing that constantly, we probably are feeling guilty and owe an amend. In fact, as I think I mentioned this earlier today, if I am chronically angry at somebody, I probably owe them an amend. Because that anger is just a deflection from the guilt. Doesn't mean that they have not done hurtful things too. Being human as well, they're just as screwed up as I am, if not more. But my chronic anger is usually a sign of guilt. 2, we can't stop thinking about what happened, and we never get resolution. Have you ever gone through the, well, and then you go over it, again and again and again in your head, and you always end up puffing yourself up more, being even more angry by the next day. I mean, it turns into the feud of the century. That's a clue that probably you owe an amend, because you're still building the case. 3, we try to recruit our friends to our side of an argument. Do you know what he did to me? There is no, here's the context in which this occurred. I did this and he did that and this and that. No, the context is not that. It's, you know what he did to me? And we always start with the end point when they did the thing that we can then say, see? 4, we've been carrying resentment against someone for a long time. 5, we feel guilty. 6, we're afraid to meet the person in a grocery store. Makes my skin crawl. 7, we notice we've had the same kind of argument or nastiness with many others, but it's not my fault. It's never me. It's just the world is full of people just like that, right? 8, we want to run away from the situation as quickly as possible. I'm leaving. That's it. You know, you've gone too far this time. 9, we need a drink or a cigarette or a chocolate chip cookie when we think about them. 10, we insist that they are completely to blame. Of course, we may not have been the only person at fault. They may have had a part too. In fact, they probably did. But to use someone else's fault to deny our own only leaves us angry, resentful, guilty, and out of integrity. This is a big price to pay for denial. Now, I want to come back to this point and reiterate it. The fact that someone else is also at fault or has a part does not help. It's not going to make me feel better. It's just a justification. If I don't look at myself and clear my part, I will never feel at peace. Ever. Because we know deep inside. That's why we do all this other ridiculous behavior. So I'm going to read that line again. But to use someone else's fault to deny our own only leaves us angry, resentful, guilty, and out of integrity. That's a big price to pay for denial. Guys, you don't want to read this chapter, neither do I. I didn't like writing it either. In fact, while I was writing it, I said, oh my God, is there anything I'm not accountable for? And what the heck am I going to do? I had all the same feelings you do. But then I got to this line and I thought, oh yeah, there's a reason. I want to make amends. I want to become accountable because I don't want to feel angry, resentful, guilty, and out of integrity. That's too big a price. Too big a price. Now I want to just briefly touch on the question, is there a time not to make amends? And in 12-step programs they say, when you make amends unless to do so would damage, injure them or others. But I'm going to tell you something, that's rare. That has been used by more people for more excuses. I can't tell my wife that I had an affair because it would hurt her feelings. Oh yeah. Or she might leave and that would hurt the children. Or this or that, the other thing. It would hurt the children if she knew. No. No. Am I afraid of damaging someone else, or am I afraid of their reaction? Am I protecting another person, or am I protecting their pathology or their ego? Am I protecting them, or am I protecting myself? Now, there's another point before we get to how to make an amends, which is what an amends is not. I call them counterfeit amends. We have all done this. You know, you've had this big blow up with your mate, and you're both really upset. And then you walk in and say, well, I'm sorry. And then the other person says, it's okay. This is it. This is the whole amends. Or you say, I'm sorry, and at best they say, I'm sorry too. Sorry about what? What exactly are you saying? Nothing. You're saying absolutely nothing. There is no amends because there's no specificity. You all walk away feeling temporarily better. Oh, good, we can get back into bed. But there is no real accountability because there's no conversation about what really happened. That is a counterfeit amends. And it's often accompanied by self-pity. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, that's all right. I'm busy trying to make you feel better for having done whatever you did to me so that you'll feel better, so that you will love me again, and we'll all be happy. No amends. Nothing gained. Everything lost. Yes, Rose?
I like the sorry, but. Sorry, but you...
Yes, oh, that's another good one.
Really threw this out of me.
Yeah.
Because you made me feel bad.
But, yeah, right, right.
A quick question is about the amends, not making amends if it's going to damage someone. What if that person, if you attempted to do something like that and says, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to talk about it.
Then you send them a letter. I've got that in.
Say I don't want to read about it.
Right. Well, that's up to them. You know, I have covered that in the book. How people can block you from making an amend because they don't want to deal with their side of the street. Or they don't want to forgive you, or whatever it is. That never stops you from making an amend. You do it. Let them do whatever. You say, well, you know, you really need to hear it. If you don't want to hear about it, I will put this in writing. Because you have got to clean up yourself. So now we come to the question of, since we've had counterfeit amends, how do we make a real amends? We have 10 minutes. The real amends, James. I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that. But the first thing, of course, is we have to develop self-compassion. And this is really important. This is where the No Wonder tool is on page 454. I don't know, again, if the self-compassion tool is in the tools, because somebody said recently that it wasn't. But it's right here on page 454. And it's very detailed, where we visualize, we try to understand why it is that we've done something. That is not part of our amends. That's part of our understanding and self-compassion. Another thing that we do when we're not really making an amends is we start out with a 3-hour conversation about why we did what we did. Then we have a 1-second conversation about what we did. No, that is not amends. That's your preparation for yourself to have compassion for yourself when you make the amends. Now, when we make the amends, it may lead to a conversation about why did I do it. And that can be really helpful to the other person. Well, but how did this happen? After you make the amends, you can say, this is how it happened. Or before you make the amends, you can say, I've realized something about myself. But what you really want to do, unless there's an extraordinary situation, is you want to start with the amend itself. And then you can get into your excuses, or your reasons, or all of that stuff. But everything is a block to actually having that moment of truth. When it's like, you're going to be executed, but there's a stay of execution. Could we just delay this for another 2 hours, 20 years? Let's just do it. Go over that process about compassion, and we'll probably be doing it in our workshops. Now, we try to make, and this is covered in detail in the book, we try to make restitution. What are the amends? How do we make people whole? First, making restitution, if you can, on a material plane. If you have actually damaged someone, taken their money, hurt them, their vehicle, or whatever, you try to make restitution on the physical plane. Sometimes you can't. You've hurt someone physically and they will never recover. And you can only do what you can do. We do the best that we can. Then we have to make restitution on a spiritual plane, on an emotional plane. It's always possible. While we may not always be able to make restitution and make someone whole on the physical plane, we can always make restitution on a spiritual plane. They may not be able to heal, but that is not your accountability. See, becoming accountable is as much about learning what you're not accountable for as it is about learning what you are accountable for. We may, in fact, help that person to become more whole than they were before we did the damage. If we are honest and we are honest in our amends, that person will go into themselves and say, well, I realize now that I had a part in this. You are helping them to become more whole than they were before. What a blessing, what a gift that is. Or you may be the only person in their whole life who has ever made an amends to them, and you will see an incredible transformation taking place in that person because they've been waiting all their lives for their mother or their father or their brother or their sister or somebody who really damaged them to make amends to them. And just in that moment of you making the amends, they're overwhelmed because they've been waiting for someone to acknowledge that they've been hurt. For example, let's say you have someone who is mentally ill and they were treated badly in their childhood or in their adolescence because of their mental illness. And you get that, you've done that. And you make amends to them. You are healing a wound that goes so far back. So it's amazing when you think about that power that you have in making an amend. Yes, Chuck?
Is amends basically the same as a forgiveness?
Well, the amends is a process, and it's all written on, starting on page 456. You make an amend, and I'm going to explain this in a minute. Okay. And then the forgiveness comes from the amend. And you're asking a good question because, in a way, you are getting your own forgiveness in the process of making the amends. So the other person forgives you, but you make the amends. And I'm going to talk about it step by step, and I can't take any hands now because I don't have a lot of time left. But it's all described. Now let me explain what the amends tool is. And we'll be using this, I'm sure, in our workshops. The amends tool is broken down into 3 specific parts. And I may just go over a few minutes today. and make this a little bit longer. The first part of it is I realize now, and it's about what did I do. And I'm going to go over this in a little detail. The second part is, and how I hurt you was, which is what the damage is. And then the third part is the forgiveness part. And even though I couldn't have done any better at the time, I need to ask you to forgive me. Will you forgive me? So first we say, this is what I did. Second, we say, and this is how it hurt you. And the third is, we ask for forgiveness. Even though, and here's where self-compassion comes in, because I always say, even though I couldn't have done any better at the time, I need to ask you to forgive me. Will you forgive me? And you have that pause and you ask for the will you forgive you. You know, when you do the counterfeit amend, you don't say what you do, you don't acknowledge the damage it did, and you don't ask for forgiveness, and you don't have self-compassion. That's really the crux of making an amend. Do you need to? Okay. So step one is what I did, and it's all laid out very in detail. What did I do? Now, a lot of us will want to start that conversation with, well, you know, I was having a bad day, or my aunt just died, or whatever it is. I was feeling stressed, blah, 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 or I had a rotten childhood, or you really pissed me off, or whatever excuses. That is not what I did. That's what the world did to me. Okay, we have enough self-compassion, but when I'm making an amend to you, I have to say what I did. That is painful, to acknowledge what I did. But once you start getting into it, it's amazing how liberating it is. It's like, well, what did I do? Because the other side of it is, I'm not making amends for what I didn't do. All of these things are for example, if I had an affair, I broke my vows, maybe I betrayed your trust, or whatever it is. I didn't destroy your self-image in that moment. What I did was, I had an affair. Just like what I did is, I hit your car at 5 miles an hour. I didn't ruin your life, I didn't send you to the hospital. What I did was what I did, not what I didn't do. If you are so emotionally vulnerable, because I talked about physical vulnerability, there are people who are so emotionally vulnerable that if you sneeze, they fall apart. I didn't make you fall apart. All I did was sneeze. So there is huge relief in saying what I actually did. I realize now that I didn't make you dinner last night when you really, when you were sick. That's what I did. Or I attacked you on an issue when I knew you were vulnerable. See, that's maybe what I did. Or I had an affair and I knew that that was the greatest fear you ever had. Or that you feel very vulnerable as a woman or as a man. Those are things that we did. We didn't ruin their lives. We didn't, you know what I mean? What did we do? Very, very good process to really look at what I did, because it eliminates a lot of shame as well as bringing us to reality about what we did. And now, just stating what we've done clears the air in a powerful way. If somebody says to me, I realize now that I withdrew from you yesterday and I was withdrawn all day, it's like, oh my God, he noticed. He cares. He's taking accountability. I don't have to walk around saying, ooh, ooh, anymore. It's already been said, it's out. It's like a relief. The world has changed. I don't have to keep building a case against him to prove that he withdrew. He gets it. I can stop going over it and over it and over it and over it. It's, whew. Because Because so much of the time, the other side of our having this constant grudge is that we have been damaged and there's no accountability. And that makes us also go, rah, 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 rah. That goes away. It's like, oh, okay, I can relax now. I've been seen. Now I go on to, and how I hurt you. We all injure others out of fear, pain, or blindness. And if we self-examine, we can understand our behavior with compassion for ourselves. Armed with self-compassion, we can look at how our behaviors have hurt one another. How have we damaged one another? We are all incredibly fragile inside, no matter the game we play or the face we put on it. Everybody. I don't owe an amend to my boss. He's an insensitive oaf. He doesn't even do bullshit. That insensitive oaf is a insecure little boy. We all feel insecure, needing love and validation, afraid of rejection, often terrified of death. We all carry shame. Some of us make shame a badge of honor and wallow in it. I'm so ashamed. Some of us hide it from ourselves or one another, but we all feel it. Recognizing our common vulnerability, it becomes obvious how easy it is to hurt one another. I'm talking about the spiritual amends now. That's what I'm focusing on in this part. Because the material amends, we can either do it, we can make each other whole, or we can't. But I'm talking about on the emotional level. We have to acknowledge each other's vulnerability in order to admit how much we damage each other and the way that we damage each other. Well, he didn't feel that. He doesn't feel anything. Be specific. Okay, I give some examples on page 460. Just as it is powerful to say exactly what we did, it is powerfully healing when we acknowledge the actual hurt that we have caused. And we do it specifically and completely. Here's an example. I realize now that I competed with you and flirted with your lover, even though I knew your lover had a roaming eye. And how that hurt you is that it made you feel insecure in an arena in which you already felt insecure. And it played on your lover's vulnerability, diverted her attention from you, and made you feel more alone than you already did. Do I need to read that again? I felt people go away. Okay. So this is an example of where I'm with a couple and I'm flirting with the lover, okay? So, and I'm making amends to the person whose lover I flirted with. I realize now that I competed with you and flirted with your lover. That's the statement of what I did. Even though I knew your lover had a roaming eye, which shows that this was something that was conscious, that it wasn't just accidental, that there was something really going on here with me. And how that hurt you, and I'm not explaining why I did it, well, you see, when I was a child, no. And how that hurt you is that it made you feel insecure in an arena in which you already feel insecure because you've got a lover with a roaming eye. And it played on your lover's vulnerability, because after all, the lover has this tendency. So like I'm playing into that lover's vulnerability, I'm damaging the lover too.
Because you're feeding their weakness.
Feeding their weakness. I am flirting with them when I know damn well that that's a weakness of theirs. It's like putting a drink in front of an alcoholic who's trying to get sober. And it diverted her attention from you. This is assuming you're a man. It diverted your lover's attention from you and made you feel more alone than you already did. That's what I did, and that's how it hurt you. Do you see how specific that is? You really have to think about the impact. When you do an amends like this, you're really getting it. You're really getting what the damage is. I didn't say I caused you to want to commit suicide because it's like, oh my God, this is so awful, I want to kill myself. You didn't do that. Why he would want to commit suicide over this, I don't know. That's something that has to do with him. But this is what I did, and this is how I hurt you. Okay, here's another one. I realize now that in the middle of your discussing with me the possibility of a divorce, we're married, I threatened to take away custody of our children. That happens all the time, doesn't it? You leave me, you'll never see your son again. Okay. I realize now, so this is what I did. Now, in the middle of your discussing with me the possibility of divorce, I threatened to take away custody of our child. Now, how did I hurt you? How did that hurt you? How that hurt you is that I threatened an important emotional bond. It undermined the courage you need to fight me for the separation. You need to fight me for the separation and divorce you feel is necessary, and it kept you feeling weak and vulnerable in our relationship. That's how I hurt you. That's it. Here's another one. I realize, is it helpful to hear these examples? I realize now that we have a lot of arguments and I always blame you as though I were innocent. That's what I did. And how that hurts you is that I deny you acknowledgement of my faults and hurtful behaviors. I play on your already existing self-doubt. I make you feel like a bad partner, and I try to make you feel like you're crazy to feel hurt by me at all, because I never do anything wrong. Deepening your shame about your own emotional state. That's how I hurt you. Here's the last one in the book. I realize now that I forced you to have sex with me and then justified it by blaming my actions on my having been drunk. And how that hurt you is that it caused you to feel that you had to choose between your love of yourself and your love of me. It reminded you of being overpowered by your father, who was at one time the primary male figure in your life. It reinforced your belief that you and your body are there to be used. It emphasized your physical weakness so that you would be more easily dominated by me on every level, and it caused you physical pain. Often when we are making an amends, what we have to acknowledge is that we have hurt you in an area where you are already weak. And if we already know that, we are accountable for it. It's the difference between that child who runs into the house just being a child, and then everybody says your father, oh my God, you're giving your father a migraine, and you're just being a child. And when you know your father has migraines, and you're angry at your father and you run in the house making noise. And then saying, but I'm just being a child. Oh, mommy, poor me. When you know something is going to cause damage, and you do it anyway. When you know a person has a particular, if you knew the little old lady in the car in front of you had osteoporosis and you said, yeah, that's what it is. We often know about the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities of the people around us. And we deliberately hurt them, either because of our own pain, well, it's always because of our own pain. We have to have compassion for ourselves, but that's an important point in taking accountability, is to realize that we knew, and that to acknowledge that we were trying to hurt them. I realize now that I tried to hurt you today. And how that hurt you was that you felt even more ashamed of yourself because you were already weak, and it made you into a puddle, and you felt embarrassed and ashamed and like you were a stupid twerp, little weakling. Yeah, just grinding it in. And you already had enough of that when you were a child, or whatever it is. Once we have shared how we think the specific behavior may have hurt you, we can then ask them whether or not they have something to add. Now, this can be useful, so the amends is complete. We may not have realized all the ways that we hurt that person just because we didn't know. On the other hand, the person to whom we are making amends may not be capable of self-honesty, and we don't have to accept everything they say. They may say, yeah, you know how else it hurt me? And you can look at them and say, well, I don't accept that. I don't really think that I did that. Or, oh, thank you for sharing that. That was very helpful. I needed to know that.
You're welcome.
If we agree with their account of additional hurts, we can repeat it back to them. We can agree, we can add something like, oh, and that also hurt you by causing you stress as you tried to please me more, or for example. At first, this kind of honesty and self-honesty seems almost unbearable. How can I admit to myself the exact nature of how I hurt you? How can I acknowledge to you how selfish, unfeeling, and manipulative I have been? Will you still love me if you know the truth? Will I? Well, I'll tell you one thing. You won't love yourself if you don't acknowledge the truth. And that's what you gain, no matter what else happens. And there's more. And then we come to, I just want to share this plan. The structure of the amends gets us away from the drama of I killed him and I'm the worst. The reality is that I did something, but when I admit that I did, I also acknowledge what I did not do. That is a relief, as the truth always is. I did not take you. I have not adopted you. And I know that you're in a very painful home situation. But I did not ruin your life. I did not blah, 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 blah. You know, it's like that. It's like getting just very specific about what I did do and what I didn't. And then we ask for forgiveness. And even though I couldn't have done any better at the time, because I couldn't, because I take it as a given that no matter what you did, you couldn't have done any better at the time. And no matter what I did, I couldn't have done any better at the time, because if I could have done better, I would have. Even if I have done the same thing 4,000 times, I'm still not there yet. And that's what the rest of this platform is about doing better, being able to do better. But at that moment, I couldn't do any better at the time. I wasn't conscious, I wasn't in command of myself. I was drinking, I was in too much pain, I didn't, whatever it is that I can have compassion for myself. I don't say any of that. I just said, even though I couldn't have done any better at the time, I need to ask you to ask your forgiveness. See, I'm asking for forgiveness for my own benefit. I need to ask you to forgive me. And that's the language. I need to ask you to forgive me. I'm making a personal, direct request to the person I've hurt. I'm not saying I need to ask for forgiveness in some abstract way from the universe. I'm saying I need you to ask you to forgive me. Will you forgive me? And now it's up to them. I have completed my amends with that question. They may say, of course, and in fact, as you've been talking, I now realize that I owe you an amend. Almost every time you'll find that there is an amends owed on the other side. Something. I realize now that when I said that to you, I knew you were in a bad state. Let's say I'm the parent and I'm yelling and screaming at the child, and I owe that child an amend for yelling and screaming. If that child is honest, they may say, I realize now that I was nagging at you when I already saw that you were upset and distraught. And how that hurt you, it made you feel like a monster because you got out of control. And one more time you felt ashamed, which is what I want you to feel so that I can feel more powerful than you. Isn't that amazing? Consciousness begets consciousness, just like fear begets fear. And often when you have made an amends to a person, they have been made whole by your amends. And when they are whole, guess what? They're more capable of making amends and being conscious. When we are whole, we are more capable. When they are whole, they are more capable. Not everyone's going to do it. Some people are going to go off and say, oh yeah, you see, I always knew you were a shit. Blah, blah, blah. Well, that's their problem. You have completed your amends, but you have also opened the universe to more self-awareness, more healing. That's most of the time. And you say, will you forgive me? the damage is huge and difficult to forgive. If you killed a loved one, that's not an easy thing to forgive. The guy who ran your child over is going to be hard to forgive, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't forgive or can't forgive. But I'm just saying we have to be in reality that not everybody's going to be willing to forgive. Some people don't forgive not because the damage is so great, but because they're so damaged anyway that their lack of forgiveness is their badge of honor. I just couldn't forgive that. Oh, I'll never forgive him for having done that to me. Yeah. That's their ego playing games with them. That person, however, is not being made whole not because of you. They're not being made whole because of them, because they are going to continue carrying the anger and resentment. But you have done what you could. Amends are a transformational moment for all involved. Let's use them.
Well, I have an example that I think relates really well to what you've just been talking about. I was listening to NPR the other day. Oh, do I need to go up there? I hope I get this right. Up here. I was listening to NPR the other day, and there was a program, and I only caught a few minutes of it, but they were a woman who was a child when she was in the concentration camp, and her family was there, was talking about forgiveness, and that I hope I capture what she said, but she said basically that, you know, when I forgive, then I foster or create healing in myself, just like you said, and healing in the other person. It empowers me and has the potential to empower the other person too, you know. So it's for the greater good, if you will. You know, it's not about anything. Or I used to think, probably why that struck me so much is because I used to have a different view of, you know, more like, well, you should forgiveness because it's the right thing to do, versus what it can open and what it can lead to.
So. Yes, and you're reminding me too, Richard, that some people think that they're losing something by forgiving.
Right, that's the point she was making.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, no. What we need is consciousness. We don't need revenge.
Right.
We need to understand whether it's the American government standing on behalf of all of us, making amends to the Native Americans or to slaves, to say, well, we're so afraid of what it's going to cost us. Oh my God, people are going to be acknowledged that they've been damaged and they're going to want all our money, and so therefore we can't make amends. You know, and like somehow we're going to be damaged by making that amend, but also people are afraid, I can't forgive that because you should suffer for what you did. I have a right to punish you for how you damaged me. Excuse me? No. You're already suffering for what you did to me. If we get really honest and go deep into ourselves, we know that the person who hurts us is at least as damaged as we are because they hate themselves. If they didn't hate themselves, they wouldn't be afraid to make amends. There is no way around this accountability step. I don't care how many rationalizations you come up with. There's no way around it. It's that last block before we can move into the next level of consciousness, which is the last two parts of our program on becoming not knowing and becoming, where we truly become agents of divine consciousness. We have to crack this nut. And in the next talk that I'm going to give on the 7 dirty secrets of the dark side, I'm going to be talking about how we then transform, because we need awareness, we need amends, and we need transformation in order to become truly accountable. Because it is true that if I am drinking and I'm beating my child, I can make amends from today to 1,000 years from now. over and over and over. I'm sorry. Gee, I'm sorry. Gee, I'm really sorry. But until I stop drinking, it means nothing. Because in the end, if I keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over, we're still being damaged over and over and over. And the amends step cannot stop that. It can heal, it can make restitution and help make us whole so that we can take that next step, which is to take on what I'm calling the dark side, which some people call the dark side. The negative energies that have been running us and that have been really the cause of all this damage. Thank you.
Am I one?
Yes.
Here or up here? Either way.
Either way. Are you turned on? Okay.
On the issue of accountability, speaking as a parent, I wanted to minimize my daughter's mental illness as she got worse and worse and worse. And so I allowed her to minimize her condition. And then I can collude with her because it then minimized my accountability. And so as I look back over recent years, I could see signs of increasing psychosis, delusion. She would talk about delusions that she was having. And I never went to the final level of self-examination or examination of what was going on to see that it was psychosis, to see that it was a true delusion and not just fantasizing about, oh, this person in Texas is thinking about me right now, or has been for a number of years, even though our contact was minimal when I knew him. Things like that, resulting in now she's at a point where she's been to a psychiatric center 4 times now in the last year and a fraction. And it's really strongly evident that she has psychosis. She is delusional, possibly schizophrenic, maybe not, but certainly in need of more serious treatment than has been given up till now. So it's very fascinating to me to see how I tried to avoid being accountable because I didn't want to go to the shame of not being a good parent. I wanted to keep that image up, that self-image for myself as much as I could. And so I was colluding with her, and then this also prevented her from being more fully aware of what was going on. And so I can see myself doing an amends to her in a communication coming up. And she has enough awareness to where she can take it in, and I think it might do some good. To me, that's a very clear example of a parent-child collusion, where the parent wants to be the good parent, the child wants to be the good child, so we minimize what's going on. You know.
Fascinating. Usually people are jumping up to take the mic.
I have something to say, but I can't quite.
I kind of look at my own resistance to what's going on as an ego or an identity, and what I'm seeing is that there is really what I'm being asked to do, and what I'm asking myself to do, is to give up a certain sense of personal power over other people. And it feels like, and I can see myself looking for people's vulnerabilities as a place to, and it's almost like a place to attack from. And I'll use this in personal relationship, but I will look at a place of attacking them in their own vulnerabilities, and I can see my ego attacks me in my own vulnerabilities, where I'm most vulnerable. Worried about self-image or how good I'm going to look. And there's something about my willingness to give that up in relationship that's very, I want to say confrontational, and there's just a lot of resistance to doing it, but at the same time, because I've gone through this process of letting that, seeing it, confronting it, letting it go and moving to the other side of it, where there's just a certain connection and oneness there. And as great as that seems to be when it's there, that sense of love and that sense of non-separation from them, it's not that easy to come back to it and do it over again. And I think that what I'm beginning to see, or what I'm beginning to feel, is the cost of not doing that. And I think the cost of not doing that is that, it's hanging out in the separation and the loneliness and the suffering and a righteousness of staying there. And it's to a point where, is that really how you want to live your life? Is that really what you want to do? It's just a questioning of it. And so that's what I've been looking at. That's about all I have to say.
Great.
The thing that to me is threatening about it is it seems like you can make an amends and you get forgiveness, and then there's always more and more and more and deeper and deeper. I feel like I can ask my sister for forgiveness for the rest of my life, and I don't know, where to go with that.
And is there anything wrong with that?
No.
It's so wonderful to get that forgiveness because the love comes with it. I think it's perfect that you shared right after Jim, because that's really the answer. The more that we are clean with each other and we clean up our relationships, old hurts and new ones, the more love there is. There's more a connection, because we're not in shame withdrawing because we're embarrassed, and the other person isn't angry and withdrawing from us in anger. So it would be, if you reframed that and translated that, you could say, you mean that I could get closer and closer and closer to my sister forever? Now I just don't know where to go with that. And could you imagine if we did that with everybody? And that we had more and more clarity and love in our relationships? It would be great.
Okay.
Stick around. I'd love to have you around doing these amends. And also, it is true that with time, we do get more command over ourselves, and we have fewer things to make amends for.
It's funny, before you got up, I was thinking, yesterday was the women's retreat of women getting real with women. And my sister was there and my daughter was there. And I just felt so unbelievably blessed to have that opportunity to take accountability, in all these different configurations, to take accountability and to forgive each other and to redo it. And, afterwards, the three of us were lying on our big king-size bed for hours just talking, and like a puppy pile, and it's just...
Just too much of that. There's just too much. How could you take it?
Exactly. And I was telling Richard
Where
afterwards,
is this going?
I was telling Richard afterwards, and we have, Richard and I do this work, and then this afternoon we have a session with our son. And, my daughter sometimes comes in for sessions with her fiance, and it's like I just feel so unbelievably happy that we can take more and more and more accountability, and we are closer and closer and closer. It's just, it's the good side of this chapter.
Good side? Here's the bad side. The hard side.
I'd love you to leave the sharings up on this video. People are going to turn it off anyway, so why don't you make it available to people who want it?
I'm really struggling with the part where you said of what to not take accountability for, because I had a situation with my dad where I confronted him on something that he had made an agreement to me, and he broke that agreement. And I confronted him about it, and his response was to be furious with me and not speak to me. And so when I finally tracked him down, because he didn't respond to the calls and stuff. You know, he said just how much I'd hurt him. He'd never been hurt like that before, and you know, it was crazy. And we're going to go over there. So he hasn't come to any awareness of what happened, right? And I noticed, like, I'm looking, what can I take accountability for? Because, like, what can I make amends for? Because, like, I want to make it better. Like, if I can, you know, find something to restore the relationship. And I feel like my ego is attacking me, like, you had to find something, you know, to make it, like, grovel or whatever, you know what I mean? And having a hard time just allowing for not doing that. So that's what I'm struggling
Yeah,
with.
well, that's a very painful moment where you have to allow space. Where you allow him, you do look and see, was there anything off in the way you delivered the message? If there is anything off, then you make amends for it. But beyond that, you just have to allow space for people to come to their senses. And you hope that they do, and if they don't, they don't.
Right.
But then you have to take a look at why you're so upset by that.
Right.
And so this just becomes another moment to practice more self-awareness.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's interesting. The stimulus
Or
is...
why do I feel so desperate to change things?
Exactly. The stimulus is that my father is angry at me.
Yes.
And my reaction is terror.
Terror.
Why?
Yeah.
You know? And my response is, I want to grovel.
Yeah.
Well, can you intervene between the stimulus and the reaction?
Yeah.
And say he's not going anywhere.
No.
You know, why am I terrified? And then between the reaction and the response, which is, I'm not going to grovel, I'm going to stand strong. And you get to look at what is that triggering, because in self-awareness we really go back to what is the real stimulus underneath it. Have you ever had that experience before with your father? Where did you learn to become that afraid that he might withdraw, and so on? And so this becomes an opportunity. Just keep working
to go back
on yourself.
And heal. I have a good topic for the peer counseling groups now.
Great.
I've been looking for something. I've been kind of jealous of all the good, you know, peer counseling sessions everyone has been given, but I didn't feel like I had, you know.
Well, now
they
you
always
do.
ask you, well, why do you need a session? I'm like, because, you know, everybody else is having a session. So, yes. So that's my request to Richard and Irene.
What is this?
Okay, great. I would love support with
triggering?
that. Thank you. Cool.
Yay. See, nothing is ever wasted.
That's right.
We turn shit into fertilizer, right?
Daily.
Daily.
Hourly.
I've had a...
Can you move over a little bit more? There you go. Thanks.
I had a couple just incredibly profound insights this morning, and I could see the resistance that I had in regards to making an amends is because I didn't want to own the consciousness or the lack of control or the lack of my own state. And I saw that basically I was able to reflect on this morning, and I can see that I never actually took control for my life. And I looked at, so I wrote down, what are the similarities of my mother and my father? What is their similarities about this? And if I am a spiritual being, how was I attracted to these experiences? And what are these experiences providing me as an opportunity to expand or develop myself? And I recognized without the stimulus, I couldn't have the awareness to then develop the self-control to be able to do those things. And it just came from a place of absolute, just like, there's no victimhood at all about anything. And I saw the resistance I had with making the amends is that I see that making the amends is me integrating this consciousness back into myself. I am owning my lack of awareness, which is why it happened. If I would have had the awareness, it wouldn't have happened. If I would have had the control of my consciousness or mind, I wouldn't have done it. And it was just to recognize that it's that big accountability that I didn't want to take accountability for, which is, I think why I've went into the levels of self-loathing and the levels of not wanting to exist and the level of waking up in the morning and wished I wasn't even alive. It's like I didn't want to do life at all. And I think there was like a light that went on this morning this is the place that actually happens. This is the place I get to develop it. These are the stimuluses that I get to have to actually do the work. So I know this is going to be used to integrate, and hopefully there is positive consequences from this, but I got myself some series of questions to basically ask myself in each event. And it's about taking, how am I being in this moment? How am I expressing? Am I expressing love? Am I integrating? Am I relating with this person? Am I having self-control right now? And to try to, I'm going to make up a little card and try to carry this around with me in each moment. Okay, am I doing this? No.
Really?
So anyways, thank you very much.
Good. I think, Christopher, what you've, stimulated me is a desire to share something. I think that people, it's like what James is talking about is in his daughter. There are people who have major problems, brain disorders, mental illness. I have it on the physical plane. I'm physically ill. There are people who are constitutionally challenged. And those, it's like the child with ADD. When the parent can be feeding that challenge by giving the child sugar, and that can make the child even worse. Let's say the child would have it even without the sugar. And that child grows up aware of damaging. That if you are, even as a child, if you have bad impulse control, if you have difficulty in controlling your behavior, it's not just your consciousness, but it's also the behavior. When you have difficulty controlling your behavior, then you will have a tendency to create a lot of damage. When you do that, it creates a lot of shame. Now, let's say we already have shame of existence, which we all have to start with. Now you add to the shame of existence the shame of the out-of-control behavior. This happens every day. The world is full of people who grew up with this. Are they going to go into becoming more accountable, or are they going to go into greater denial? How are they going to face the degree of damage that they're creating? Just like if you become alcoholic, or you have anything else that impairs you so that you become more and more and more damaging. As the more damage you do, the less you want to be accountable, because the more shaming it feels. Or if you suffer depression and you see that it's just dragging down the whole family, you're not going to work, you're leaving, you're abandoning your family. There's a million things that happen to people that they really don't have that much control over because of some physiologically based dysfunction or whatever the source of that is. And then their choice is, it feels like, to either go into denial or feel shame constantly. And of course that shame will then cause more denial. So how do we help people like that to intervene with themselves? Well, one thing is we have to acknowledge, it's what James is saying about his daughter. Instead of saying, well, you can get a job, it's like, well, but she can't. The girl is psychotic. She can't, at this point, function on that level. So you're not adding more shame by asking her to do something that she can't do. And I know that from personal experience of having been physically disabled, and people not knowing that I was physically disabled, not understanding that I'm disabled. As a child, nobody really knowing what was wrong with me anyway, and me walking around my whole life thinking that I was lazy. And I am like one of the least lazy people on the entire planet, and I actually thought that I was lazy. I had a moral judgment of myself because I didn't know that I was actually really ill. I really thought that I felt the same as everybody else, but they managed to get themselves up. I didn't know that I was really, 1,000 times weaker than everybody else. That it was harder for me to get out of bed than it was for them to run a marathon. And I'm thinking I'm lazy. And that is so true with mental illness. There's so much stigma attached to it. There's so little understanding of it that we're busy judging people who have mental illness. And so On top of that, we heap expectations on them that are unreasonable. And then we often have given them things that are actually going to make them worse, like give them sugar and reward them with sugar, which creates that sugar addiction. Or they start drinking, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and they become more and more disabled and less capable of controlling their behavior. And so there it's getting worse and worse and worse. Now, what do? You have to say at some point, I get it. Stop. We have to stop this dynamic of being in denial, of expecting people to do what they can't do, and that the person themselves have to be willing to say, I am willing to be accountable instead of being ashamed. And I am willing to see what it is that I'm doing. And I am willing to look at the damage that I'm causing. And then I'm going to try to get help with the things that I'm doing that are making me worse. But if we're ashamed, we go to the things that make us worse because they temporarily make us feel better. It's going back to the alcoholic or the drug addict. It's like, I feel so, or your daughter, whose drug addiction really precipitated a worsening of her psychosis at a very early age. It's like she feels so bad about who she is that she has to take drugs in order to change her feeling state. We're back to the beginning of the book. She's trying to change her feeling state instead of trying to change reality. And so she will use the drugs, which make her more psychotic. And now she has the shame on top of that she's used the drugs. So it's an amazing moment of clarity to be able to say, I am completely accountable for what I'm doing, and I'm not at fault. It's like there's an expression that I learned, which it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. It is my responsibility to try to do what I can for my condition, and to try to get the support to stop doing the things that are making my condition worse. And simultaneously, every one of us around that person needs to take accountability for how we may be either enabling them, or being deluded, or shaming them. How complex is it? It's like the whole collective needs to change. It's not enough for us to start saying, I get it, you're mentally ill, if the person doesn't take accountability for their illness. And it's not enough for them. We can't expect them to be able to take it all on themselves if we're not doing our part. So it's here we are. We're back into the oneness. How we as a collective need to realize that shame and blame are so much at the core of why ill people don't take responsibility. And why people don't stop. So we even have an accountability there, a collective accountability, to shift our consciousness so that it becomes easier for people to stand up and say, and this is what I've done. And I am out of control, and I don't know why, and I can't control myself. And for us to get it, oh, this one really does have more trouble controlling themselves, just like this one really has more trouble getting out of bed. This is real. This is real. It's like what we were dealing with yesterday in the women's group, when there was a person who suffers from being exasperating at times and has struggles with emotional issues, of having to acknowledge, oh yeah, I was exasperating as a child. And that's not shameful. It's just reality. And no one's off the hook. We're all on the hook. The mentally ill person and the people who are dealing with them, who are also mentally ill probably, because we're all crazy. If you don't know that, read the book.
When I brought up the thing about forgiveness, this thing about the amends adds a whole thing to that. For years I have been using a technique where I give forgiveness to people in my life, living or dead. And I do it while I'm taking a shower, because I'm not having to call them up and say, I forgive you. A lot of them I can't get on the phone. But this adds a whole different aspect to that. because being able to forgive people is an important part of what you're doing. You need to be aware, and I know that I have found out that forgiving people heals me as fast as it heals anybody else.
That's right.
Thank you.
I really appreciated this conversation this morning because I've been struggling lately with the accountability because I've had to teach the part of history. I've been avoiding it. The Indian Removal Acts, and the Manifest Destiny. It's like I didn't even want to tell kids, because they're all my kids are Mexican. And really struggling, their families are struggling. And it's like I don't even know how to talk about it because I'm here, I'm this white person, like reaping all the benefits of all that has happened, and telling them to work harder, and it's like I don't even know how to talk about it. And what was triggered it was when you were talking about when you just don't want to talk about it because you have a part, so it's just don't talk about it because you just feel so guilty. Like, how do you even make amends? Like, will you forgive me? Like slavery. I mean, all of it is it's so awful. But I know that it's all affecting them now, and because I really do want to talk about it because it's affecting them now, and they have to find a way. Like, we have to find a way, to understand it, and they have to but I wanted to talk about, well, what's your part, it's helpful, and that was what opened the door too. And you were saying it's really rare when there's no
accountability on the
part
other side,
on the other side. But then I'm like, slavery, like, where's your accountability for? Is it just because you allowed yourself to be a slave, that you weren't willing to fight to the death, and the Mexican-American War was similar. But anyway, I just think at least the door's open in my mind now to how we can talk about it, like how they're really feeling and what do they feel ashamed of, and that they can forgive, what I'm saying, like they can maybe start to forgive themselves and also not feel ashamed for being here because they feel ashamed for being here, and I can maybe help them with that, like, you have nothing to be ashamed of, but here's your time not to quit. We can't do anything about that, what happened then, but you're fighting for your life now. That's what I want to say to them, but I don't want to sound like I'm overlooking what happened, but just that's all I feel like I can say. It's like every time you quit now, it's like you're just this is your chance.
Also, very often you will find a weakness in the people who were dominated that was caused by injustices in their own societies, and the collusion of those who turned others over to be slaves.
That's right, and that did happen.
It certainly did, and Mexico was a very stratified society. As well, there was a lot of
they were susceptible to somebody coming.
Exactly,
that's right.
That's the way it was, and the few Spaniards could not have taken over Latin America if there hadn't been weaknesses, and that's very interesting because that will lead us into the dark side, how the dark side will find a crack. So I'm not condoning or exonerating anybody, but I'm saying that if you go into the objectivity and you look at things, just as we were trying to do about mental illness, we go into objectivity, then we can say, this is what was done here, and this was the motivations and the corruption and the desire for our own purposes, and what was the weakness on the other side that allowed that to happen. Why were you not able to unite and stop these 200 guys You know, how did that happen? So it's just that you get past shame and you start looking at reality.
Yeah.
And it's all becomes learning.
I know, and I wish I knew. That's what's made me want to learn more about what happened, because we're not doing the conquest. We're in the Mexican-American War at this point.
Right.
Why did we lose half of our land? And I don't really know, you know, because the 8th grade textbook's kind of like a summary, you know, it's really not what really happened, and all of it's so opinionated anyway, it's hard to find objective. But I know also what opened the door too in my mind was when you were saying about the two-way accountability, and how you can't just, you don't want to give up, you don't want to forgive because this is your big excuse, you blame now forever, and I know that I want to talk to them about that, like you can't just keep blaming white people like for the rest of your life, or blaming America, like it's gonna hurt you too, is like it's better to look at like what really did happen.
That's right. You know, when I was in the movement, there was exactly that discussion. Or do black men have a right to beat their wives because they're disempowered by white men?
Right.
You know, and black women were saying, wait a minute, you know, wait a minute.
Right.
So
and we can't take account of like for all the whole situation in Mexico, is I think sometimes they see it like that. Like, well, if Mexico just, like if California were just Mexico, like Mexico would be rich. You know, like it's that simple.
Right.
Where Mexico hasn't done everything it could do to better itself either.
Yeah, so it's about getting past shame and blame and really starting to look. And I think it's great that you're asking those questions, and you'll stimulate them to ask good questions too.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to ask a question though of what is she truly accountable for past historical actions that she didn't do any of that? I can see that you're trying to understand, well, you as a member of the Caucasian race owe some sort of reparation or accountability to those that were dominated and exploited. But historically, she wasn't there, she didn't do anything, so what?
Well, because we are all one. And in fact, I'm glad you raised that, because I want to clarify that I tried to talk about this before. We are collectively accountable for the state of human consciousness. And it's the state of human consciousness that has caused all of it. And so whether she was personally responsible for the Mexican-American War and what was off on the other side, or slavery, it doesn't matter, because it's going on today. I mean, we have the same things that are going on today that were going on then. And what it's the state of human consciousness, the things that are causing this, it's the ego. It's the fact that we need to take it on, the whole inner revolution of taking on how we have been dominated by the ego. In this way, that way, it doesn't have to be about yesterday. It's really what it is now. It's almost like time doesn't matter. It's what is the state of human consciousness? What do we need to change? How are we going to change it? And those are just examples. So that's how I would look at it. It's like, oh, this is what we did then. This is what we're doing now.
You could also say that as a woman, you know, in the not too distant past, women couldn't vote. You know, husbands were legally allowed to rape their wives. You know, not to make yourself a victim, but to say, you know, we can all rise above hardships. I mean, there's ways to connect to it. Like if a man said to me, I can't believe women weren't allowed to vote 100 years ago, I go, I know, it's shocking, isn't it? You know, but I wouldn't be mad at the man. I wouldn't blame the man today.
But I think that's really avoiding something, Chris. I think the point is that it's the dynamic with our egos and the way we are dominated by ego that is today, that was yesterday, that women do the same thing that are hurtful to one another, to that all of it, there are no victims in the sense that we all are colluding in a state of consciousness which we have to shift. So it's not about allocating blame and saying, it's just, what I'm trying to say is we need to get it that we are a collective consciousness in the process of evolution, and that these things are just examples of what we do to one another. And that's why I'm always bringing in a million different examples of different kinds of ways that so that nobody can say, yeah, but that's not me, I never did that. Well, yeah, but I did this.
Okay, I see.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And if I could just add something, so one of the things I see that could be helpful perhaps is this recognition that my race is not better than yours, and yours is not inferior to mine. My ethnic group is not superior to yours. Your ethnic group is not inferior to mine. But we are one. To bring that into the discussion.
Right, and it's our tendency to think only of ourselves that is really at the bottom of it all.
Yeah, and I just really appreciate what you're saying, because all of it's universal. I mean, there's racism in Mexican society, like
Exactly.
rampant,
Exactly.
unquestioned.
Yeah.
I mean, here it's at least like you're not supposed to sound like that. I mean, they didn't have the civil rights, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's yeah. So, yeah, that's great. I agree. It's about the conditions that created that, which are still perpetuating today, and we can all relate to both sides of it.
Okay, so I feel like we are coming to the close. We're actually on time. Does anyone have a burning desire to share before we close today? Something that they feel that they need to share?
I have a quick question. I am bothered. Like, I've been bothered ever since we heard about, seeing somebody crawl to their car. Like, I would stop, if you see somebody crawling to their car with the intent to drive it, I don't see how I could not stop myself to stop this person. And so I've been thinking about it the whole time, and I'm just struggling with the whole notion. Like, why were they crawling to their car? Who were they? Where are they? Where can I talk to them? and then I don't know why am I so hell-bent on thinking about this situation. So,
well, does anyone have something to share? What's wrong with you being bothered by that? There's nothing wrong with you being, it seems to me, from what you're saying, I don't know exactly what you're addressing, but it seems to me what you're saying is you are waking up to the questions, the important questions of the day, and it's bothering you. And that's the first step towards accountability. I don't hear anything wrong. Is anyone else?
I mentioned to her when we were talking that you can check in to see what's for the highest good. Like, if there was like a 320-pound drunk man stumbling to his car, I don't know that I would go jump in to stop it. But I could call the police. I could park my car in front of his and not get out of my car. I mean, but we talked about checking in.
Is that what you're talking? I mean, I didn't know what you were talking about. Yeah, but that's good that you're asking those questions, and maybe it would be a good question for you to address afterwards with somebody. It's like, why is this bothering me so much? I wonder what this is triggering. I wonder what this is triggering. It's probably triggering something in you where you may have felt in the past that you saw things that you didn't do anything about, and you feel shame or guilt about that.
I'm pretty good about speaking up, when I see an injustice. But I find it hard to understand. I think my question is how you could see that and not do something about it. That's what
that other people don't
right.
In? Is that what you're bothered
by?
Okay. Well, I think that we can all say I am that about that in some way, that there are things that people feel overwhelmed or afraid, or they're self-protective. And that's exactly what we're talking about changing, is that people don't necessarily ask for what's for the highest good of all. They just say, well, I don't want to be disturbed, and I'm afraid my security. This is what I've been talking about, is the ego. So, everybody looking after their own security. So you have a part in changing human consciousness. That's what you could be taking on. So if things like that really bother you, then maybe you should come to the stream and help us to help to raise people's awareness about the inner issues that cause people to be so self-protective that they don't help one another. So that sounds like a good thing to me. So as we close, I would like to say that we are here. That means each and every one of us is hunkering down right here on earth, taking a stand, and we have each other's support. And I invite you to listen to the second video, even if you're not in Consciousness Boot Camp, on the 7 Dirty Secrets of the Dark Side. Because we need to really start understanding how to deal with negative energy on this planet, so that we can come to regulate the flow of our own energy and become a blessing to the world. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.